Hi everybody, I am Jeanette, the owner of SWACembroidery.com, and today I'm going to tell you a few of the tools that are must-haves in my embroidery area. So let's get started. The first thing that I feel I always need is a good sharp pair of thread cutters. So I do replace these fairly often. As soon as they get dull and they're not cutting, I can't be bothered to mess with the scissors. So I don't know, I would say every year, 18 months, I just get a new pair of scissors. They're reasonably cheap. You can find them pretty regularly. So a good sharp pair of scissors to trim your threads. Another thing that I have is a pair of tweezers. I use these actually a lot more than I thought I would when I brought them down. I use them to pull threads through the needle if I'm having a little bit of trouble grabbing the thread in the back. I use them on a project if I need to pull a thread to the back, or if a thread has a little bit of a catch in it, I can pull it through with the tweezers. I also use them if I'm using tearaway stabilizer. I can pull some of the small pieces out inside of letters and things like that pretty easily. So I always have a pair of tweezers laying around. I always have a little box of pins. I do float a lot of my designs, and I'm going to do more videos in the future. Like, this is just the first one of a little bit of a series. So I'm going to do a video all about how to float your designs. But what I am doing here is I'm actually embroidering on toilet paper. So I hooped the stabilizer and then I pin the toilet paper down so that it doesn't move. And the one thing I will say when you are using pins, you should always outline your designs before you stow them, but especially if you're putting something in the hoop, you need to trace and make sure it's not going to hit those pins because it will break your needle. So this design is going to go right in the center here on this one. So I do pin a lot of designs. I float a lot of designs. I do not use a lot of spray adhesive. I feel like it gums up the needle, so I prefer pins. But I'm going to, like I said, do more videos. I'm going to talk about floating designs and when you do use spray adhesive and when you do use pins. And another thing that I always have is really good thread. I almost exclusively use Robust and Anton, and we do sell that on swacsupplies.com. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the thread, and I'm also going to do more videos in the future about thread too. So I generally use rayon. Rayon has a little bit more of a sheen than polyester, and I like the sheen that the rayon gives. But I'm going to show a couple things about these cones real quick because I don't think a lot of people realize that this bottom pops open. So when you have the end of your thread, you pop the bottom down and you slide the end right in and slide that up. That way you don't have to worry about it unraveling when it's sitting on your shelf. And the Robust Anton comes in a 5,500 and 1,100 yard cone. So I read something online when I was looking up a couple things about thread that on average, if your thread breaks, it takes 8 minutes of time for it to be fixed from the time you realize that it broke, the time you figure out where the design ended, take a couple minutes to go back and make sure everything is lined up right, rethread the machine, start the design again, and then you have to wait a few seconds to make sure it's sewing again. So if your thread breaks 10 times in a day, you've lost almost an hour and a half of your time and stitching time. So it definitely is worth it to pay a little bit more money to have the better thread that's not continually breaking and causing problems and disrupting what you're doing. A lot of times when the machine is running, I have a desk sitting right next to the machine and I'll be loading the next design and get everything ready. So when the thread breaks, it stops everything. I lose my train of thought of where I was. I have to rethread the machine. So it definitely is worth it to get really good quality thread. And I use hoops. I have quite a bit. Obviously, you can see behind me there. Those are for two different machines. We have two machines back here, but I use the smallest hoop that the design will fit in for the project. So I think it's good to have a good variety of hoops too, because the bigger the hoop, if you have like a 10-inch hoop and you're just stitching a little 2-inch design, that gives a lot more room in the hoop for there to be play with the fabric and stretching and pulling, and you don't want that. So I'll use either a 4-inch hoop, or I actually have a couple like 2-inch hoops. Some of those round hoops are like 2.5, 3 inches. So you want to use the smallest hoop that holds your design. That's what I was taught. That seems to work very well for me. There's been a couple times where I've said like, oh, I don't have a small hoop. I'll just use this giant hoop to stitch something out real quick. And you can definitely tell the difference. The other thing that I always make sure I have is good stabilizer, and that I'm using the right stabilizer for the project. I feel like I could talk for a really long time about stabilizer, so I'm going to do a couple more videos just on stabilizer in the future. So I would like to know what your favorite notions are, and if I'm missing something. Is there a must-have that I must have in my sewing machine that I don't in my sewing room that I don't have right now? So I will be back in 2 weeks with a new video. I think the next video is going to talk about thread, and I'm going to compare Robus and Anton with I'm going to do polyester, rayon. I'm going to talk about metallics, and I'm going to talk about a couple other different kinds of thread and what needles you need for them. So if you have any questions, I would love to hear them. Write them in the comments or let me know what you think of the video. Thanks. Have a good day.